We'll call to order this workshop for the Siloam Springs Board of Directors on January 21, 2025. Roll call.
Blair.
Here.
Burns.
Here.
Wiles.
Here.
Hunt. Rissler.
Here.
Allen. Carroll.
Here.
Thank you. So with that, we will turn this workshop over to you, Alan.
All right, thank you, Board. Thank you for being at the workshop. What we're hoping to do is have some good discussion on the roads and our plan and our maintenance plan. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin. And please, if you have questions or concerns, let us know. You'll see after he gives his presentation, we do have some money left to do some other possible projects if the board doesn't. If it's not on there and you see a need, we'll discuss it. But we'll talk more about that as we go. Kevin?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the board. I'm excited to talk to you about streets tonight. I think a new plan that we have moving forward as we're revising our maintenance plan for streets and sidewalks has a good opportunity to really benefit the community. I'd like to start by talking about pavement a little bit, some of the particulars of asphalt, and kind of go through what we have in place and some of the new systems we'll be using to analyze future projects. And then we'll look at that list of projects at the end of the presentation. The first thing to know and really understand is that asphalt starts to deteriorate from day one, even without traffic on it. Just weathering in the environment begins to deteriorate asphalt from sunshine, drainage, temperature changes, things like that. So we're designing asphalt based off of an expected traffic load, and part of that assumption is a percentage of heavy traffic. And so we use something called equivalent single axle loadings, which allows us to accommodate that percentage of truck traffic with the expected lifetime of the road. So for, say, a collector street, we typically design for 9,000 vehicles a day, but that truck traffic assumption will vary based off of where it is. If it's on, say, Brashears Road or Country Club in an industrial area versus closer to a residential area, we're expecting more truck traffic in that. Even though the number of vehicles a day isn't changing, that drastically changes the pavement design. We're looking at the supporting structures, so those in-place soils, the bearing capacity that those have, and then the engineered select fill that we bring in, typically red dirt. We have a local pit off of Keck Road that we use for a lot of the development in Siloam Springs. And then on top of that, you have Class 7 base is what we use in this area, and that's a specific aggregate mixture of gravel that has been designed with the amount of fines and water quantity, to compact to a certain level and have a certain bearing capacity at that compaction. And so we do tests as that goes in to make sure that that's meeting the designed capacity. And then the asphalt as well. And so we play with the thickness of those layers depending on the traffic that we expect, the truck percentage that we expect, to get the streets around town. We're going to have a few just kind of examples. And this is typically not a linear decline. It's kind of exponential for the most part. And so as things start to decline, that opens up the possibility for further deterioration in the pavement. And so as we get further outside without any sort of maintenance to curtail that degradation, then we begin looking at our streets declining too quickly. So here we have, just for your consideration, an example of a few different streets, and you'll see Street 1 carried kind of throughout these next couple slides. And that we're using that as essentially kind of a good street deterioration if we weren't going to touch it in any way. Did you have a question? I'm sorry.
I do, thank you, sorry. Just trying to understand how streets are made. So the Class 7 base is first, and then the asphalt's on top. Is there anything in between?
Not in between. So you have your existing soils that you dig down to, and typically we'll call a geotechnical engineer out on site to view those existing soils and make sure that they're somewhat firm to build up from. And then we have red dirt that engineers select fill, and that varies pretty wildly depending on that in-place soil. So that can be anywhere from 8 to 12 inches to 6 feet, depending on the structure that they need to make up for their design assumptions based off of the soil that's there that they're dealing with. And then you have that Class 7 base on top of the engineered fill, and then the asphalt. So it's kind of the opposite of what I'm showing there under that supporting structure.
So,
So asphalt base fill, and then existing.
so my neighborhood, the streets were done, okay, I was 18, so 38 years ago. They're starting to have issues, but 38 years, and they're still really good. And so I was talking, some contractors live out there, and they said like a fabric used to be used. I mean, is that why they've lasted so long? I mean, why are they so much better? And I know there's not a, do you know where I live, Country Acres?
I'm not super familiar with it. Is the road at a decent grade? Like, does it have any drainage issues on the pavement or anything like that?
It's very hilly.
Okay.
So, I mean, there are some issues, and of course, over in the last 38 years, there's been a lot of houses built out there in construction, so it's gotten some heavy use, but talking to one of them, they felt like it was the way the road was made back then, that it wore better than the way it's being done now. And so I guess that's part of my question, like, what is the difference? And if it was better, maybe it's not. Why is it being done that way?
So typically, there was a period of time where we would use what was called Petromat with our paving, and that would be, I guess the salesman pitch is that it's essentially giving that asphalt something to stay together on as it expands and tries to slide and whatnot, and it helps with that. Asphalt's a flexible pavement, even though it feels pretty hard, but compared to concrete, it's a flexible pavement, so there's a little bit of give there, and that Petromat can kind of support that and lend it a little bit of extra structure. The reason we've kind of gotten away from using that is because it's typically thin enough in that pavement that it causes issues when you mill and overlay later on. So when you're trying to demo the street or mill the street, it actually gets caught up in that process and leads to, it just prolongs the maintenance side of things and makes it a little more difficult.
So does it make the road last longer? I mean, because then it's like, if it makes it last longer, then where would the cost-effective, cost analysis be?
I'd have to do some digging into things that aren't just like promotional material, like studies and things like that.
Yeah.
My understanding is that RDOT and other DOTs have moved away from using Petromat, and so that's why locally we've kind of followed suit and moved away from the different additives and things like that you can put in those pavements.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So we'll use an example. Street 1 is kind of an untouched decline, but something that we're not concerned with. And then streets 2 and 3 are declining at different rates. And this is going to be pretty common throughout town. Even sections of streets will deteriorate at different rates. So if you look at, a good example would be Sherry Whitlock, just west of Mount Olive. If you drive through there, you'll see the crack ceiling and everything that's had to be done because of the added traffic that the intermediate school puts on just that isolated portion of street. And so that 500 feet, call it, is in much worse shape than the rest of Sherry Whitlock as you go west all the way to Dogwood Street. And so even within streets, just from block to block, these can deteriorate at different rates. So we have our kind of ideal Street 1, and then Street 2, let's pretend we notice it starting to decline, or we have a built-in surface treatment option. We have here in the yellow basically Street 2, but with a surface treatment. And in reality, we should be treating our streets in some way, whether that's a rejuvenation or a fog seal or a chip seal or mill and overlay. We should probably be touching our streets about every 7 years with some sort of improvement to make sure that we're prolonging the life of that pavement. And so you can see here if we pretend that we've treated that perhaps multiple times as it's declining, we've slowed down that decline from what was a pretty severe decline in this example. We also have the overlay option, which typically won't bring a street quite to new condition. It's not going to be the same as a rebuild in any way. But as you look at overlays, you're bringing that back up from kind of a fair or beginning to be considered critical state back up to a good usable condition. And then full rebuild, of course, would bring it back to essentially a new street. And the other thing that you can do is just kind of within an order of magnitude, you can kind of see the spread and the improvement that you're making is going to be kind of the cost of that improvement. And so if we're trying to bring a pavement up from critical condition all the way back to excellent brand new condition, that's going to cost a lot more than if we're treating it as it's declining further on back.
What exactly is an overlay?
So an overlay is actually a full new layer of asphalt. So typically 1.5 or 2 inches. You would overlay if you have the structure is still in good shape. So the road is supported properly, but you're beginning to see surface defects, things that are affecting the user's experience, basically. But the street itself is in good shape, and you're putting a new layer, a full new layer of asphalt there. And then you have mill and overlay, which is typically so that you're not overlaying into the curb and reducing the stormwater capacity of the curb. And then also like your tie-ins for the streets that you're matching up to at intersections, you'll mill out that intersection so that you have a clean seam where you're joining back up. But the improvements to the street itself, if you were to just mill, you would gradually see the pitch of the road increase as the layers go down. And so oftentimes, after you've overlaid a street several times, you'll either remove all that old pavement or begin like milling the center lines so that you're not increasing the pitch anymore and things like that. But you can expect to get about 15 years of life out of an overlay as long as the structure is there.
And you're not, I don't know, rototilling up the current layer of asphalt, you're just putting more on top of it.
For just an overlay. So for a mill, you would be tilling up that top layer of asphalt and then putting a new layer down. So oftentimes, especially when we're doing it internally, we'll mill and overlay just because it's down to staff time at that point for the milling rather than contracted cost and things like that. So as just an example of what an improvement plan might look like moving forward, if Street 1 and Street 2 are never touched, and we pretend that here in this yellow is Street 2 but with a maintenance plan, so we're slowing the decline with surface treatments, and then once it reaches a point that it's no longer acceptable, we overlay, and then as it declines again, either like mill and overlay to replace some of that layer or full rebuild depending on what the needs for that area are. This is a road condition analysis that we have currently. We started doing this in 2016. The most recent data was in 2021. And there's a company that partnered with the University of Arkansas for some research to do a machine-based assessment of the streets. And so they break our streets down into excellent, good, fair, critical, and lost by driving the streets. They're identifying things like structural issues, surface defects, potholes, standing water issues, concrete breaks, and things like that as they go through this. And looking at some of these streets, so typically the ones that are in more fair and critical condition are streets with more than just a surface defect. So if you see a street on here that maybe as you're operating the vehicle, you can hear those surface defects, but it shows up as good, that kind of tells you that the structure is still adequate. And so that would be a good street for a surface treatment rather than beginning to look at pulling material out and replacing old material. That is from 2021. That's the most recent version that we have. So, and along with that, instead of just the line work, they marked surface defects, low, medium, and high, based off of the severity on the driving comfort. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean that the structure is failing, just that you have a defect there. And if it's not maintained properly through crack sealing and other things, then it could deteriorate further and actually affect the structure of the street.
Hey, Kevin, do we have anything set up in the near future to do this process again, since we were around 1621? It seems like we've been doing it every 4 or 5 years.
Yes, I'd like to do it every 3 to 5 years, excuse me, and I believe I have in here proposing that in 2026 for an update. The most recent cost I saw was about $95 a mile, so we'd be looking at 12,000 or so plus add-ons. I've not actually quoted it, but that was the estimate from that company. So they also provide potholes at the time. Ideally, all these should have been fixed by now, since we've had several years to look over these. Structural and drainage issues identified in the pavement. And this is more what is affecting those, that condition analysis, that condition. And so the structure defects more than the surface defects are what's leading to a larger decline in those areas. And they can also look at concrete slabs and identify just corner breaks or like half slab breaks, quarter slab, full slab, things like that. And we'll zoom in on a section of this here in a moment.
Kevin,
Yes.
so on our pothole fix, so what's the maintenance criteria? So when you come to a street that's got a subsurface, are we building up that pothole from the subsurface up? Or are we just out there? And I'm telling you this because, you know, streets are the number one thing. So I'm going to be kind. I'm meeting workshop number 1. But the observation is we take a bag of asphalt and dump it and tamp it. So it doesn't look like, you know, like we're doing like an SB2, some sort of subsurface. It doesn't look like we heat it up at all. And when citizens drive by and they see a crew do that, it just looks like a really poor attempt at fixing a pothole. And I love Dennis, don't get me wrong, but I just feel like, you know, there needs to be on certain areas of town where they know they're high visibility and high traffic, that the pothole maintenance need to be, you know, we cut it out, we square it off. My observation is I don't think we're doing that extra work that potholes require. And I know by the red dots, they're numerous, but it is being noticed by the public. And our pressure now, and I fully accept it, is we're not meeting public expectation. And this is the basic. This is, you know, washing the car. This is what the public notices. The pothole maintenance is not done at 100% effort. You're welcome. Thanks,
Thank you.
Well, Kevin, you know, and I agree, there's a lot of times that, you know, Steve and I had conversations, and Dennis, because it seems like we go out to a pothole, we fill it up, 6 months later, we're out there fixing that same pothole. So I appreciate that, and that's something we'll look at and address and make sure we're doing it the best to our ability.
Can I just ask one question? On this road condition analysis, where it shows the streets that are excellent, good, fair, all of that, who decided the condition of the street that they show is like excellent or fair? I mean, what went into making that decision?
That was the company that assessed the streets through that driving analysis. And currently, that's all we have. I'll get to kind of a system that we'll be transitioning to, but we have too much street and not enough staff to fully transition to a more kind of data-driven system that's out there. And so we'll try to use those in tandem, where we do every 3 or 5 years do this city-wide analysis, and then as potholes and other issues come up, we assess the road in that immediate area to figure out what condition the road itself is in, if there's something that can be done to prevent further deterioration, and it's either a specific section or if a street needs to be moved up in priority based off of what we're seeing as issues, because ideally you should never see a pothole in a good or excellent street. That's a larger issue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Zooming in on the Sager Creek edition, so this is, of course, Sager Creek Drive, done last year, which that was all marked as either critical or lost. And then now the 4 streets to the north, awarded last year, they're planning to start in February to rebuild those streets. Those are all marked as well as either critical or lost. And then that large section of those concrete slab breaks you can see here, the majority of those slabs have one issue or another, whether that's a structural issue or even just a corner break. So they've gone through and assessed all those, and this was what was provided to us in 2021.
Kevin, on that previous slide you just had, that's the bird streets.
Correct.
Well, I'm looking at the previous one that has the colored lines on it. When you look all the way to the far east of that slide, what is the street? Is it Heartland?
Yes,
Next
that
to the
is.
fire department? You've got it listed as critical or lost, and frankly, I disagree. The only thing that really is a problem is the center of the street. And this is what Brad was referring to, is we can fill in a pothole. Alan was saying the same thing. 6 months later, the pothole's back. And I've seen it over and over and over. Or the pothole will sit there open and getting bigger for 6 months with nobody doing anything. And it's not the sides of the street. It's just literally the center of the street where I guess the paving joins together. And so I hate to see us put a bunch of money into redoing an entire street if there's any way to just fix the middle. There may not be a way. There may be a way that there is no way to only fix the middle. But that's where all the potholes are, is right down the center. So it's used a lot more than people realize.
Right, and I would, without having inspected that area, I would assume that there's probably a larger structural issue with the street itself
yeah.
leading to that breaking in the middle with the larger equipment coming out of that fire station. I think that's the degradation that we're seeing in that area, and why it's not, up and down like in the tire path or anything like that. It's on that center line with the turning movement.
I just wanted to make you aware, I go down it a lot, and it seems to only be in the middle. It's weird. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So, and you'll see here in that same area at the far east of this slide, they show several major structural issues. That's the triple pound sign there for major structural issues on Heartland Drive.
Kevin, for that, so on that one there, and if we remember, Villaview had the same issue. We had a couple of subdivisions that went with this cement. And I don't, it's many moons ago. So what's the base? Are we having a problem? When we pull that up, what's the base on that that's requiring us that seems to take such time?
A lot of, you mean time of construction or
Yeah.
the issues that we're seeing?
Because who are we using on that?
For the 4 Bird Streets, that'll be First Star Construction, and they'll start in February.
What name?
First Star Construction, they're out of
I was
Farmington.
gonna say,
We almost got frightened.
it's not First Star times 3. Okay, good.
They've changed their name.
That's the first thing.
So what is it something that wasn't required then? What's requiring us to take that, because we're going away from cement, we're coming in. Are we, because I noticed are we digging deeper than we have to? Are we going down to, is there any red dirt in there at all?
There wasn't on Sager Creek Drive, so they had to cut about between 2 and 3 feet on Sager Creek Drive to find anything usable, and a lot of that was just concrete with no gravel underneath it at all, just more or less on topsoil. So I'm shocked it's lasted, it's been in a bad state for a while, but I'm shocked it's lasted as long as it has, just based off of seeing that. But that does absolutely add into the time for construction when you're removing that, and then you have to dig down, because what was done before was basically just covering up unusable soil.
I don't know who built Sager Creek Drive, but I know Villa View Addition was built way, way, way back in, I think back in the early 70s, they thought concrete streets were great. And they just don't move with the dirt, with the earth. And I'm really surprised it's lasted as long as it has, because there's some places that are just like gravel. They're just so broken up.
Yeah.
And that's the way Sager Creek was too. You know, I don't even know when Sager Creek got paved, if it was in the city limits. I assume it was, but I can't imagine the city actually using concrete.
I think it was built by the developer,
Yeah,
I
that's
believe
what
in the
I
late
figured.
70s.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's more or less rubblized at
Because
this
the
point.
bird streets are not concrete, are they?
Yes, they
Oh,
are.
are they? They are too? Okay.
Well, they're gravel right now.
Well, I knew Sager Creek
They're broken
was,
up
but I
concrete.
didn't know if the bird streets were, because for some reason I thought it was only Sager Creek. Okay.
Hey, Kevin, if you don't mind, since we have this up and there's questions being asked, lessons learned from Lake Francis, kind of give them a rundown how we're going to do the bird streets, if you can do that quickly, kind of our plan going forward for that.
Absolutely. So what we bid this project out as is 60 days on each street. And then each street has to be completed before demoing and beginning work on the next. So in meeting with them, we had our pre-con about 2 weeks ago, and their plan is to begin from west to east, demoing the streets from south to north, just with the way that the water flows. And so they'll start at that intersection of Mockingbird and Sager Creek, and then it's 60 days for that street, wrap it up, final it, 60 days for the next, and go all the way to Sherry Whitlock, wrap it up, final it, and then the last two individually as well. So, because what we wanted to avoid was having excavation on Mockingbird and then sit for 330 days while they work their way down to the 4th Street.
Our thought is we're not having a complete construction site in that entire area. It's a little more expensive, but we think it's going to be a lot better on the citizens and the homeowners and the people passing through there to do one street at a time, move on. We're just not having one big construction site.
You can have, since it's really two developments with 2 streets in each, you can have one street being done and the people can use the other undeveloped street to get back and forth.
Yeah, they'll close the south end, and then, they'll detour traffic through the one that they're not working on.
The only ones that should be hindered are the ones on the street that's actually being developed.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's-
for as short a
that's
time as
smart.
possible.
Well, I think it was Mindy who was quoted in the paper as lessons learned. So, hey, that's a good lesson right there, what you're describing, of what you can do better.
And just where the board knows, liquidated damages now are $500. They've doubled from where they are. So that's.
Who
in effect
decides
now.
that, Alan? Is it the board? Is it the state, or?
It came to me and I went for attorney review because it's we can't call it fines, it's got to be liquidated damages, so it's what we can defend. Am I saying that correctly, Kevin?
Yes, that was the number we landed on that Jay was comfortable defending if it were to go to litigation.
It's
I
the
would love to say
damage to the city
$1,000,
per
but
day of
It's what we can defend.
yeah, inconvenience to the citizens, et cetera.
Thank you, Kevin.
So we kind of went over the road condition analysis, and we'd like to update that every 3 to 5 years. And then perpetually, what we'll be doing is called the Pavement Condition Index. So this is actually an ASTM standard for evaluating pavements. And they set, you'll notice, additional categories. They don't have an excellent, but they go from good all the way down to failed with recommended maintenance based off of kind of where you're at in the process. So routine maintenance and surface treatments, and then as you work your way down, you're looking at thin overlays, maybe things like chip seals, micropave, things like that, and then get into thicker overlays or mill and overlay where you're actually having to remove material before you replace it. and then all the way down to isolated and full rebuilds as streets decline. They start that process with a drive quality test where the inspector would drive the section of street being evaluated and assign a low, medium, and high depending on the impact to the driver. And then they have 19 different distresses that they evaluate in that system for asphalt pavements, and then another 19 for concrete pavements. And the benefit to this is that the PCI system is really good at analyzing the effect that multiple types of failure have on a section of pavement, rather than just when you drive through and see one thing, assigning it just say pothole or whatever else. And so actually sitting there and saying, well, is this pothole rutting? Is this weathering? Is this edge cracking? Is this something else leading to the issues that are ultimately felt by the drivers? And then recognizing that these cause the street to deteriorate at different rates. So some of these issues like alligator cracking and block cracking, those aren't the same and they don't affect the street the same way. So each defect is assigned a deduct value from 100%. So things like potholes are major defects, which will essentially on their own fail that section of street. And then even when you fix a pothole, it's a patch, which is a lesser defect, but it's still tracked as a defect in that area. So some of the things, just to hit a few, alligator cracking. This is typically in the wheel path, and this is a loading issue with the street. It's a load failure. And block cracking is usually larger pieces, and that's actually a weathering temperature cycling issue. So again, at getting down there and having somebody capable of identifying, is this a weather issue? Is this a drainage issue? Is this a loading issue? And drilling into if it's a design assumption that was wrong, like if we're seeing more traffic or more truck traffic than expected when the street was designed, or if it's just not been maintained and has been allowed to deteriorate to that portion. Bleeding, so when some of that asphalt and bituminous mixture actually comes up out of the pavement in the summer as it expands. This isn't something that I have noticed as an issue, but this is something that'll have to be tracked as our surface treatment program expands, being mindful of that. Different types of cracking, whether that's longitudinal or edge cracking, particularly as we get streets that are kind of at that minimum width with no curb and gutter, as the edge falls away, tracking that and tracking that deterioration.
Kevin?
Yes.
I might have missed it. Brad was talking about the potholes and cutting out and all of that. Is that the way they should be done to last, or is just dumping the asphalt and tamping it down? Is that the best way to do it? Are potholes filled that way never going to last?
Cold mix has its use, but it's not intended to be a permanent fix. So cold mix should be temporary to hold you over until you're fixing a larger portion of the street and you're properly blocking out the area that needs to be replaced and squaring that up. RDOT has a good detail for patches on state highways that calls a certain distance out from the edge of the pothole that has to be cut down to base, and then examine the base, determine if you have to cut out any more of that before you actually pave and close it up again. And part of that is kind of this PCI system of trying to identify the actual issue that created the pothole rather than just filling it in and ignoring it.
So since it takes a long time because they're expensive to get to all the streets, why don't we do it more like RDOT does it than just the cold press pack, whatever you called it? Sorry.
That's just a discussion we'll have to have internally, because I don't know where we draw the line between cold patch and full patch. But that's a conversation that I need to have.
Evan?
Yes.
I'm gonna help you out with some history, and by the way, I was a kid on Highway 10 when I'm about to say the year. But in the 1970s, there's a future pioneer citizen that's coming on board, and back in the day, boards ran departments. as an example. Mark Simmons ran the fire department, and you don't want to hear about all that, do you? So on the streets, at one point, we actually had adopted that policy. And so a lot of that outside noise that, you know, we hear a lot of the not meeting public expectation is we're just not adopting those standards. And and having worked in the fire service, we adopt standards. And so I just strongly would suggest, even though you may get fewer potholes done, I would think in the longer run, it would be more cost effective, and we would hear less complaints if we adopted a standard that was done at a state level, and it takes a lot of pressure off of the city that we just adopt those standards. So have fun internally.
Well, and
Aren't you in charge of that or something?
I am, yes.
All right.
So, and I'm glad you mentioned that because part of what led to this presentation was a revamp of our street maintenance plan. Because what we have currently is essentially an 11-page memo on what the previous 3 years looked like and what the next 3 years look like. And that's fine from a budget perspective and setting projects and things like that, but that's not a maintenance plan, like what you do when you have a pothole, what you do when an intersection fails, what you do when the asphalt's washed off the top of a bridge because of a drainage overflow. And so just accommodating those things on a more permanent basis, because that maintenance plan should be internal and not have to come before the board, which I believe the last one was 2021 or 2020, and it's overdue at this point. And that's why I'm working on that. But the maintenance plan should live on its own for how to treat and evaluate streets. And then the results of that, the 3-year improvement plan, is what should be coming to the board. And so that's what led to this presentation.
Kevin? I'm just going to put my 2 cents in, not 2 cents, just kind of support the 2 cents that have already been put in with adopting some sort of standard. And with an example, there are several potholes out at the Villaview addition. It is built just like the ones on the Birch Streets. I believe Glenwood and Greenwood are also cement streets. All 3 of those areas have lots of potholes, which just become crumbling messes. And when they're filled, they just don't last very long. So I hear again, well, that needs to be filled. But the exception is that there was a pretty significant pothole in Villaview that the street department had to come in and actually cut into the ground a foot or so at least, I think. And it was a big area, but they just took out all that crumbling mess. And I believe it's staying together pretty well. It took more time. It was probably inconvenient for the people because it was such a big area, but I think in the long run, it'll probably be good for us. And maybe even time saving because we don't have to keep going out and filling it. So I'm just saying, yay, the standard.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I second, third, the standard.
Thought this job was going to be easy.
Evan? I think, and I'll give you some background perspective as well. Back in the 90s, we actually voted as a board to disallow any street cuts. I see this one slide of where they are patching, and we made it mandatory that only going under the street would be allowed. And that included the city. So the city could not even cut the streets to put a utility line or a pipe or whatever. I don't know when it changed, but it didn't last long. It was put into place specifically when North Dogwood was being widened and paved from University all the way up. And we put the bike lane in there. But at some point, I don't know if it actually officially changed on the ordinance, but it didn't last long even by the city abiding by that. But I do know, having read the entire city code several times, that I think you or someone in your position has the authority to grant a license for a street cut. I think it is in the code. The only time anybody can do a street cut is by approval by the city, and they actually have to pay a fee and do it with your approval. And the only reason I bring it up is because I recently saw it. This Blackberry Estates only has one house that's being built, and driving on North Dogwood saw these gentlemen with a street saw out cutting into the curb, cutting into the street. And I mean, if you know that this is not by code. And so I just immediately called the PD and said, you know, you can't be, you got to let these guys know they can't just be randomly doing this. But many people think they can, that, oh, it's just in front of my house. I can just cut this curb and, you know, put in a new driveway.
Yes.
But I think, don't you? I think you have the authority that you must approve.
That's correct. We have a bore permit and a street permit, and the bore is, of course, the preferred method because it doesn't impact the street. And then if the utility is in the street, there's really no option.
Right.
You have to cut to it so you can actually do the work at the utility. But if the utility is outside the street and you're crossing the street with adequate space for boring, then that's usually required.
Yeah, I thought from what I remembered in the code that you specifically had to, or whoever's head of Public Works has to approve. And in fact, even, I think they must pay a fee or a license for it. Yeah.
Yes, there's a permit fee and a bond that has to be put in place.
Well, this didn't look like it was going across the street, but it looked like, I mean, when you see two men out there and they're looking up and down the street to make sure no one's looking, you know, then it's kind of like, I don't think they are probably doing it by the city's authorization. So I just wanted to make sure people need to be aware that you gotta follow those rules.
So for patching, like I mentioned, kind of discussing potholes, even once a pothole is repaired, it will still be tracked as a defect as a patch. It will just have less of an impact on the PCI score. And then, of course, potholes themselves, we all know what potholes look like, and we evaluate based off of size and depth in that PCI method, and pretty much any pothole presence on a section of street will fail that portion of street until it is repaired. And then rutting, oftentimes this kind of goes alongside with alligator cracking, though not always. And so actually measuring the depth of the rut and then the length as well, if we have a full street section that's rutting or if it's just at like stop signs, things like that. And then I won't go through all these, but again, there's another 19 for concrete pavements that are covered under the same ASTM. What I'd like to propose is a mixed evaluation system. We have about 125 miles of street, and so to do a true PCI scoring rating system of all that street is not something that we can implement quickly. And so having that road condition analysis done for our entire network every 3 to 5 years, and then if we have major defects like potholes on streets that aren't on our 3-year plan, then getting out and assessing those with the PCI score. And then particularly if we have a major defect on something that's excellent or good on that road condition analysis, then going at least a block, probably a quarter mile in each direction to assess the street to figure out what's going on in that location. Why is this either an isolated problem or is this section of street declining faster than we expected? And moving forward, tracking that change over time so that we can be prepared for major projects before they're needed. Again, not all streets and not all sections of streets are going to decline at the same rate, and evaluating that cost to repair and maintain against the amount of traffic that a street receives, and sorting our system, we need to find a balance between local residential streets and thoroughfares like collector streets, major locals, things like that, and get that balance for our maintenance plan as well as our improvements plan moving forward. Our goal for the maintenance plan is not to increase the capacity of the street, but to prolong and then bring back up to good condition the street's usable, the time spent in a usable state. So we want our streets in that excellent, good, and fair condition, And as it's declining into critical, we want to plan for that, whether that's a small, like a micropave overlay, or if it needs a surface treatment to get friction back or handle the water, if it needs a mill and overlay, planning for those things as they come up before their critical needs. And then with our improvement plans, things like implementing safety countermeasures, curb and gutter, storm improvements, pedestrian improvements, those major widenings that affect the capacity of the street and the options for road users in an area as well. Part of what we'll be looking for guidance from you as a board is what is considered a fair street. So something to be thinking about moving forward into this next budget cycle. If you can find streets just as you're driving that are kind of borderline between, and you can tell me this section of a street is as bad as I would like to see, then we can start associating real costs to that. Because it is a subjective measurement when we're talking about ride quality and things like that. And that's part of why we're trying to get into the PCI system and get more of a data-driven option. But until that point, when we have that ready to go citywide, we'll be going more based off of that road condition analysis and what you all as a board would like to see improvements on what is an adequately fair street that's not negatively impacting users. And then our improvement plans moving forward. So one of the things that we need to consider is our master street plan width, which we do have some revisions coming up in that unified development code to change some of the widths and change some of the options, multiple options if it's close to a school or close to a park, things like that, to provide additional pedestrian options. But also this is going to affect widening projects if we're looking to purchase right-of-way rather than use the existing right-of-way in the area. That will bring up the eminent domain discussion more often if that's the route we'd like to go. From the plus side, that gets us the street that's planned for the future at the time of the project. So if you look at Hyco and Tahlequah, those streets are wider than they necessarily need to be today, but they're prepared for future development whenever that comes. Just to kind of give you all a little bit of a metric for the estimates that we're about to talk about. For in-house, we're operating at about 45 cents per square foot per inch of asphalt. And so for a mill and overlay, that's about $1 a square foot measuring existing pavement. When you look at a notch and widening, which is an overlay in the existing street, and then you're typically like a 2-foot widening, something more than just over paving into the existing dirt, but actually digging down and bringing up the engineered fill, the base, and the asphalt to actually meaningfully improve the width of the street. And I have a few of those proposed. But we're looking about $1 a square foot in the mill and overlay area, and then closer to $8 a square foot for the widening space. And that will typically get you your driveway changes like culverts, ditch realignments, and things like that that have to happen. Our in-house rebuilds are a little better, typically between half and a third the cost of bidding a project out. And so looking at about $15 a square foot, of course, depending on scope as utilities have to move and things like that. And then contracted rebuilds are costing us about $35 a square foot, particularly when utilities or storm improvements are involved. For an example, again, this is all pre-design, pre-right-of-way acquisition, all that. A 37-foot Collector Street rebuild of Dawn Hill from Mount Olive to Oakcrest would be looking about a $5.5 million bid in today's dollars. In-house, closer to 2.7. And then it doesn't look like much of a difference going from 37 to 28 feet, but that would lower your right-of-way cost, which again isn't represented in these estimates, but you'd be looking at closer to 2.3, 2.25 for an in-house widening. And that's, I believe, with sidewalk on one side of the street, was what that number was based off of. And then notch and widening, which would get that existing 18 feet in width to 22 feet. So adding 2 feet to either side, moving culverts out of the way, relining ditches, things like that. Closer to $215,000. The downside to this, particularly in this location, is that the Commons and Heritage Ranch have just widened to our master street plan width to that 37 feet. So a notch and widening is no longer as viable a solution in that area. And then mill and overlay, we're looking at about 75,000 square feet of pavement to go all the way to Oak Crest.
Hey, Kevin, before you move on, go back to project cost. So as you're looking at 15 a square foot and a subcontractor's 35. So I think one of the problems we had, and, you know, I'm just remembering the past, and I just refer back to Kenwood, because Kenwood was the first major project that the city did a rebuild on, that we got a lot of public, you know, it was, I don't know, level of Lake Francis, it was pretty heavy. We got a lot of pushback, and we had a lot of delays, because we had some major drainage issues. One of the hangups that we had with city staff is that we work Monday through Friday. And let's say Monday through Wednesday it rains, and then you have a good 5-day period, and the subcontractor is supposed to chase weather, you know, knock on wood. So that means they work through the weekend or whatever. So that was one of the delays there that, you know, we're dealing with city employees. Is there a way to, if we were to start doing some bigger projects again in-house, can we put in these real numbers? Like, can we have employees work on a Saturday and a Sunday at time and a half?
We can adjust the numbers for that. That'd be a conversation I would need to have with finance.
Because that might be, I mean, you know, if there's some projects that are large and we're doing these culvert prefab boxes, I'm looking at Dawn Hill and I'm looking at, a couple of major drainages with Oak Crest being the most significant one, and doing that in 3 sections. And if we did that at 37 and we did that in-house, but we gave the employee the alternative, because we do in a crisis, the guys just put a bunch of hours on doing streets, right? And they did it out of love, but they also did it out of, money. I've been a city employee, so I chase the overtime. It's the same way with the streets. I don't feel like we put the numbers in there to adequately, give us what that is, and then allow, kind of motivate the worker that, there is some overtime opportunity on these projects.
Right.
Get a little better buy-in.
Yeah, these estimates are standard time.
Right.
So 40 weeks or whatever number we were looking at when Dennis.
But
and I-
Mother Nature
Right.
on these projects, that you're really working around Mother Nature. It's not a Monday through Friday
You
job.
can see that too. It's a good observation, because again, when you're looking at what the cost is, we're going to save a lot of money by doing it in-house, so that would give us extra money to give those incentives to get it done.
Kevin?
It seems like that would be a good cost analysis to do, but one of my concerns about that is if our staff is working on building a new street, then the rest of the streets aren't getting taken care of, the striping isn't done. I mean, how do we address that? I love the idea of saving money. I'm all about that, but
So we actually have both. So we have a street division, which maintains our existing streets, and then we have an infrastructure division, which goes out and does the new build projects. So they would do that separately from the street division.
it seems like they struggle to keep up as it is. And striping comes to mind because there's always a need for that. And it seems like our striping in general is really hard to keep up with because of the wear and tear. And they can't, they're only human. They can only do so much. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor. Kevin, it's my understanding we have, over the last 10, 15 years, we have discovered or decided our niche, or niche, or whatever that word is, what we do best and what we don't. And when the project's too big, or that may not be the best verbiage, but a project like Kenwood was, in many people's eyes, beyond our scope. And it would have been better to farm that out, or if we don't, we need to go out and get that bigger, better equipment. But I know there's a cost analysis factor that fits into that. And do we have kind of a good idea of what we do best and what we need to farm out?
Yeah, and that will vary year by year depending on the other projects we're looking at. So I think the 2026 budget, I have an option of Don Hill and Oak Crest. And particularly with those, the city obviously would not do both with in-house staff, so we would look at maybe one over the other, depending on the complexities of the project, the number of owners that we're dealing with, the drainage, the utilities, and things like that. And then in 2027, I've got Airport Road as one of those, and then I think one other rebuild as well, depending on costs. But those kind of moderate, like 30 to 40 week builds are what we're really targeting with our in-house street, with
Our staff,
infrastructure division.
our equipment, and the dollars, they're all lining up with that. We're not getting out of bounds with any of that.
Right.
Okay.
Along those lines, and I hate to bring this up, and my memory may not serve me correctly, it often doesn't, but I kind of thought one of the reasons we decided to do some of the bigger projects more recently, why we decided to bid those out, was because the first Kenwood project, Kenwood back behind Neighborhood Market, was a project that our staff did, and I thought we realized that it ended up taking longer, and maybe it was a little bit bigger than we should have taken on. So it seemed like after that, we kind of went more toward, in fact, I think there were comments made about, well, we should just bid all the big projects out. So, is that correct? My memory-
That's what Brad was talking about. And we
Yeah.
had drainage issues, and we had so many issues from that project. And it was horrible. The feedback we got was way worse than what we got on Lake Francis. I mean, it was bad.
This is something Kevin and I have discussed. You know, we want to try to do in-house projects when we can, but we got to make sure, like Director Blair was saying, we got to make sure other things are being taken care of, and we can't pull away from that. Some of the projects you'll be seeing that we'll be bringing forward, or he'll be discussing with you, a lot of the mill and overlay we will be doing in-house. The bigger projects, you know, the rebuilds, though, again, if,
Don Hill is a complete rebuild
right, and that would be,
we're looking at doing.
he'll explain that too. We're not looking, if that's rebuild, I don't see us doing that in-house. That's just an option where he's showing you that.
How many rebuilds are we looking at? I mean, if we do the mill and overlay like you're suggesting, how many rebuilds in the next 3 to 5 years are we looking at?
I would cap it at one a year.
They are needed at this point, though.
I don't have that number. We need more than we can.
And as we go through this program, you'll see he'll have some of the major projects in there that we can answer that. Again, we know Airport Road, there's some significant ones, the Don Hill, but again, they get very, very expensive. And we're trying to be very strategic at how we're doing this.
And there are different levels of rebuild too. We don't necessarily have to widen the street and relocate utilities and remove everything 3 feet down and do this, that, and the other. Sometimes in some areas, we can just get by with removing the pavement, replacing the base, or maybe putting some sort of geotextile fabric down for extra support or something like that, and then rebuilding up from there. So one of the ones that's not on this list, the Eastgate subdivision, that subdivision is so flat, we can't just mill and overlay it. We'll have the exact same issues because the water can't go anywhere. So that'll have to be a full rebuild where we're actually adjusting the grade of the street to accommodate the drainage needs in that area.
Well,
Madam Mayor?
if you do the, sorry,
If you're not done, go right ahead.
if you do the overlay, if you're doing what you're proposing on the overlay, would it not lower the number of needs for rebuilds currently. So the need wouldn't be as great.
Right.
Is that what you're, okay, that's what I was
Yes,
trying to get.
we just have so many streets that have deteriorated to the portion where at least parts of those streets have to be fully rebuilt.
In the last 15 years, if you overlay, an average of 15 years.
It's like Benton Street that he's looking at for 115,000, that's doing a mill and overlay. And we all know that, you know, I live in my apartment's on that street, and it's bumpy, it's really bad. If we continue to let that go, we could be looking at a rebuild in a few years. We think if we can go in there now, do the mill and overlay, that street will last us 15 years and be in good condition, but we got to make sure we're following the maintenance plan after 5 to 7 years to make sure we're conditioning it correctly. And that's our hope. We don't get to the level we have to do a complete rebuild. We got to make sure the foundations are correct. I think we've built some streets, Airport Road's one of them. That's something Director Blair's been on me since I've been here. I really believe we built a road on not a good foundation. And that's why when you get anything heavy on it, it crumbles, because the foundation, the red dirt, I don't think it was done correctly. So we got to make sure, it's like potholes. We got to make sure we're doing this stuff correct, where we're not going back and doing it every 6 months. And that's why the maintenance plan, that's something Kevin and I discussed and he's brought forward. We've got to make sure we're doing these little things that we don't create big problems for the future.
So you mentioned Airport Road twice, so I'm gonna, so has the county come to the table on it? Are they willing to
Yes,
pay
ma'am, that's one of the things
their
we're
part?
looking at for discussion. It's probably the 27 model. I would love to do it sooner, but that's something I'm trying to partner with the judge. They're already saying they're going to partner with us on the
Oakcrest.
Oakcrest.
They've asked to partner with us on Oakcrest for 2026.
So I've got to look,
They-
which one's more important to the citizens? Is it Oakcrest, is it Airport Road? Because it's both, it's going to be a partnership with the county.
But the county has said they'd partner on Airport Road? Because before annexation, they would, and then they backed off. So
During annexation, that they were saying, hey, we're looking at a partner because he's getting Judge Mooring's getting a lot of complaints there too. Then we had to get through annexation, so we're going to bring back to the board again, or to Judge, to see if they would be interested. I think they would be, from my previous conversations.
good, thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Oh, go ahead.
On your list here, Kevin, on Don Hill, I would be interested if you could give us info on the 28-foot width being bid out
Okay.
instead of in-house. Simply, I mean, you've got the 37 as a comparison. I'd like to see it bid out, what it would cost. And I give you an example. I was listening, and I remember the Kenwood by Mazio's was long and drawn out. I think it was the first instance of wanting to use the new equipment that was bought, I think, for $1 million, and it took forever. And then the other Kenwood took forever. I think what I heard, at least on that instance, is that it took so much time because of, at least back then, our crew would be pulled off to go fix a temporary problem and then have to come back. And maybe that's just rumor, I don't know, but that's what I heard at the time. But what I was going to state is that I can give you a personal observation driving Villa View every day, Villa View Drive. Our city did do that in-house and did a good job, except for the actual asphalt itself. If you drive down it too many times, you're going to have to buy new shocks for your vehicle because it's just like this all the way down. Alan drove it not long after it was done, and I think you talked to Steve at the time. I never did hear the answer, but I can tell you, at the time it was being planned, this was still under Don Clark, and he was only going to put a sidewalk because it was so needed. There was going to be no width added. And it was, I think what you show here is Don Hill is 18 foot. And that's what Villa View was. It was only 18 foot. Now, I can tell you, they only were able to get 2 foot. But it has been huge to the drivers because it was too narrow and too scary if you met a truck with wide mirrors or dualies or whatever. So getting the storm sewer, the curb and gutter, The walkers love it. It's amazing. It's a huge improvement. But when we got down to it, I'm fairly certain we did put that down when the weather was too cold and it did not adhere, or they didn't roll it when it was hot, one or the other, because it's one of the few streets that's fairly new in town that I think is worse to drive on after it's been built. And I don't know if something could be done about it. But I'm just saying, yeah, 37 feet is great, but even if we just went to 28 on Don Hill, it'd be massive for being safer driving. And I'm just saying, based upon the 2 foot that was added on Bellevue, I really would like to see in the future a possible public workshop where people can come and give their own testimony, maybe provide photos of what they believe streets should be added to the list. But I think this type of thing, what we got here, this handout, would be helpful to get us this before we have the workshop. I hope we're going to have another workshop, because the board being able to go drive these, the ones that are red or most intense or whatever you call it, can give us a better view of, well, this one here that's got the yellow, red, and green. Yeah. That would give us a better insight into where you're coming from. Just so, and I say it because we're the ones that have to spend the money. We're the ones that have to approve it. And so if we see what you see, and I also believe, I brought this up to Alan, I don't think it's a bad idea to have a field trip of the board to go and actually look at streets and point out things that we all know and see, to provide to staff our insight. It's difficult to do in an environment like this if we can add to this by going and actually looking. I mean, everybody knows, everybody in the whole city knows, streets has been our biggest issue for a long, long time. It was a lack of funds, a lack of concentration on it for many, many years, and now we all agree we've got to get beyond that and fix it. But there was a study done long ago under David Cameron that proved the advantage of doing farming out to a bidder versus a city in-house crew on, yeah, you're paying more, maybe $1 million or $2 million more, but you can also farm one street out to this company and farm this street out to another company. And I'm just saying, I still go back to TriStar getting 2 street contracts at the same time. I just think we've all learned a big lesson in that regard. But anyway, I want us to have more board input on this rather than only being tonight. I want us to look at being able to go and look at these and come back and have another workshop.
Mayor?
Thank you.
Alan?
If we could, we're going a little bit longer. If everybody, while it's hot, wants to grab something, just take 2-3 minutes, grab some food, come back, and we'll get started right back up, if that's okay with everyone, and then we'll get rolling. I just don't want it to be real cold and the eating as the board meeting starting, if that's okay with everyone. Good, Mayor.
So we will recess. Everyone, please return to your seats, please.
I'm ready for a stop.
We will call this workshop back to order. And Kevin, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Brad?
All right. Hey, I just want to bump off Director Blair. When that airport road was in Ward 2, before the corrections were made, a lot of pressure was on that director at the time, may not have been me, about that area. And I understand wanting to partner with the county, but we put in another subdivision there. It's a horrible intersection that's going to be addressed by RDOT after, X fatalities, because they have a certain quota. But it would be advisable. That's a great subdivision. They have some of the best Christmas lights in town, right? I mean, they do. And can we bump that up or put that in instead of waiting for the county just do it to Stonecrest, from 412 to Stonecrest seems a logical thing. And if it works out with the county, it works out with the county. But that has been going on for a while, and it's a bedroom subdivision. And, I mean, it's worthy of tidying up, at least to the subdivision. We don't have, and then wait on the county to finish going out to Shin Springs.
That is something that we had discussed, particularly because if you take Airport all the way north, then the next logical improvement is Bill Young Road, which is of course well outside city limits. So trying to figure out that balance between, like you said, waiting on the county and what we can do in-house for Siloam residents.
And we are, to go off of what Brad said, there's another subdivision going in on the south side of Stonecrest. So now it's going to be even more people affected and more wear and tear.
Yes.
Oh, the one that's near the highway? Yeah, yeah.
Now, their entrance is pretty close to 412, so they won't be on the north side of the road as much, but still, it warrants moving up.
I think at one time they were hitting up the state to put a stoplight there because how much traffic was going to be coming. And I don't know. I see both sides, but I cannot imagine coming into Siloam at the top of that hill, you immediately got to hit a stoplight. Just a little weird,
No, it is dangerous.
but it's dangerous intersection for sure.
Kevin?
Okay, thank you. So some of the projects I'd like to propose for 2025, you'll notice Elm Street and Kenwood have been removed as rebuilds. I've kept Kenwood as a mill and overlay from Mount Olive to Washington. There are several potholes and patches on that road, but I think the primary issue with that road and some of the complaints that we get are that seam along the shopping center just east of Mount Olive, so that seam between Kenwood Street and Goodwill. So milling that out and properly reworking and reconstructing that seam as we overlay the road would be important in that area. I'd also like to add, and I plan to bring these to you in a budget amendment at the next meeting, and I'd like to add Waukesha Road from Kenwood to Corder Road to this year's projects. Part of that is to realign that intersection with the incoming Corder Road extension from Siloam Community Gardens, that development off of Highway 16. So they're proposing to extend Corder Road all the way from Highway 16 to Waukesha. And where that intersection is right now, they would be, with the existing right-of-way, tying in on that curve. And so I think it's important to get ahead of that and realign that street to create a four-way intersection there at Waukesha and Corder Road. And then we already had Corder Road and Waukesha both on here for mill and overlays. So that would allow us to wrap those up kind of all at the same time and provide a good final product. Also adding Benton Street as a mill and overlay, including the parking extension to the south along the park. And then Glenwood Place, an overlay of the asphalt portion. So about 3/4 of that subdivision is asphalt. And then the southeast quarter or so of that loop is concrete instead. So we would be replacing the asphalt portion. Sherry Whitlock, I mentioned that as an example. So Sherry Whitlock Parkway, right there by the intermediate school, is failing compared to the rest of Sherry Whitlock. So getting in there and doing some needed maintenance on that road. Willow Court, a cul-de-sac with some drainage issues, and the pavement is really broken up. We had a recent water leak over there that took the failing pavement, and that pavement is no longer able to recover now that we're having other issues created by that.
Here's Willow.
Off of Helena, which we mill and overlaid
Oh, I know,
Helena
okay,
Street
yeah.
last year. So Pickwick, Primrose, Montclair, and Red Maple, those are all in the Ravenwood subdivision. And Director Allen mentioned a possible tour or a field trip, and I think Ravenwood subdivision would probably be a pretty good place to go for that because they have a lot of different failure types in their streets. So we
Kevin,
can
what is
look
the
at-
green print versus the black print?
I'm sorry, the black was already approved for this year's budget. And then the two in red would be removed and replaced by the green. So the green is what I would be proposing in a budget amendment at the next meeting.
Just so directors know, we got about 1.8 million in there all that's not spoken for, so as we go through this, we want to add something, we can. If you look on this list, I don't know, you guys been here a lot longer than me, but we got 16 streets that we could address this year, so I'm pretty excited about that. This is something that the board wanted me to make a priority. So we've really done that to stay on top of it. Just keep in mind, the Bird Streets with 4 streets, we'll be 240 days, right? We're 60 days, or is it 60 days per street?
60 days per street, and we've allowed them a gap in the middle since they would have to demobilize, because paving crews are typically separate from
So
dirt
we're
work.
less than a year just on the Bird projects, and then if you would, give them a quick update on East Main, the grant, because we're hoping that will get started in September. We're a little behind right now, but that's a total rebuild. So we're gonna have a lot going on with rebuilds in the city, plus all these.
Before you do that, I just want to say on the ones you're talking about, they're in Ravenwood, right? Ravenwood Edition.
Correct, yeah. Pickwick is one of the worst.
And I haven't been out there, so I can't give any idea on, except I've heard people talk about. The only concern I have is when you have streets in a limited driver number housing edition. And these are only overlays, so they're not that expensive, which is good. Take care of them before. I mean, Alan was talking about Benton Street. Benton Street's been like that for 15 years. It's really kind of almost held up, even though it's a mess. It does need, so I'm glad we're talking about overlaying it before it gets worse. It definitely needs to be smooth but as Katie was telling me, she's not sure, and I agree, that Don Hill can last till whatever year you've got it on, because of the amount of crumbling on the edges that we have on that. And I was reminded, talking to Lisa, that Elm Street had crumbling on the edges, and we lost a fire truck. An actual fire truck turned over, didn't it? Something happened.
It turned on
where
one side in the
was-
ditch. And once it's turned,
You
yeah.
saw it as like, but it was totaled. And it was all because it ran on that edge and the asphalt crumbled. We're seeing that now and have for several years on Don Hill, and without curb to protect that edge. I think what we have to do, no matter what, in the future, is learn from our mistakes, and some of our mistakes have been like when we've seen all the housing additions that have been going in on Don Hill. And yeah, they're not just on down, they're coming in off North Carl as well, but tremendous amount of traffic on Don Hill because of the trucks building these homes. Well, that means count every home, you're gonna have at least 2 cars. And with that much more traffic, we've got to take care of the arterial road that gets there. And we've not done that. So that's why I'm saying, I wonder if we need to, and I don't think we should try to do Oak Crest at the same time as Don Hill. I think you've got to have that route available for people to take down Hyco and down Oak Crest to get out to Lake Forest Heights and all the other. But from that crazy thing that just got hit, that weird rail sidewalk thing that's now wiped out, from there south, we ought to really consider just trying to find the money, because I just don't know how much longer it can go before there'll be some serious wreck.
And Director, if I may, and that's something we've looked at and we've tried to figure out if we can do funding. The issue we're having right now is, and what I'm going to do, I have it in my notes, is invite the board to come out and do a tour of our wastewater. We're in critical situation right now. And it's going to be several $1 million. We're looking into grants, and after the AML last week, we found out we're not the only ones. It's water and wastewater is the critical needs in the state right now. So there's some grant money, but we have to get some things fixed out there. And I want you guys to get a tour, because we're having hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage because the things people are flushing, because most of the equipment we have are not automated. It's just in very poor condition. So again, I'm just trying to figure out which project, which I agree, we need to do it sooner than later. But again, we just got to figure out the money, which,
The flushing the disposable wipes, is that what's doing it?
It's rags, it's just anything they're flushing, and the machines that are out there, like today, it's completely frozen. They're out there with rakes, and it's no way to get it out. I mean, it's in so in February, I'd like to get you out there, and then let's start talking what we want to do for the future. And I've got some ideas, and I'd like to hear yours on what we can do. So I agree, I wish we had a big pot right now. I could fix a lot of these things, but we're getting critical there. But go ahead, I'm sorry, Kevin.
It's okay. My biggest concern trying to do Don Hill this year would be that bridge, particularly if we're going as far north as Oak Crest, where the drainage crosses beneath Don Hill. So I would need to look into that. And currently, we don't have a fully staffed engineering department. So that's also, we're getting to the point Alan and I are discussing with Christina, getting to the point where we're going to have to figure out what projects we're going to have a firm design and what our limits will be in-house until we get fully staffed again.
Whoever took that little bridge out, are we able to go back on them and say, you owe us for this? I mean, it had to have been one of those construction trucks, right? Surely.
I never saw it. So
I never, yeah, I didn't know if anybody had checked into it.
Unfortunately.
Kevin, can I ask you a question about, so the Bird Streets, I 110% agree that those need to be fixed. They've been crumbling. To David's point, about them maybe not being about some streets not being as traveled, I know that is a consideration you have to take.
And we'll catch heck from the people watching that live on those streets, but.
Well, but they do. I mean, they are crumbling. They absolutely have to be fixed, even if they aren't as much of a thoroughfare as other.
Yeah.
Glenwood, Greenwood, and Orchard Hill, which I referred to earlier, aren't too far behind them in that crumbling stage. And I see that you've got a portion of Glenwood, but just the asphalt portion, because again, it's concrete. So do you see them?
I think those are in 26 in our next year's plan.
I don't see Orchard Hills or the rest of Glenwood or Greenwood.
I don't believe I had those
Yeah.
on this list.
Do you see them making the list at some point for the same reasons? I mean,
Talking about
they're
for
probably
a completely redo or just an overlay?
what we're doing for the Bird Streets. I think the Bird Streets are in worse condition than those others. I think those others are probably not too far behind. And they're ones that I hear about with the patching up the potholes, and then it just crumbles again. But it's Orchard Hills. I referred to it as Villa View. It's Villa View neighborhood, but it's Orchard Hills that had the big, huge section taken out, and that seems to be holding up. And it may be that that's what we have to do at those other streets where we have the bigger potholes that just our temporary repairs aren't working very well. But they probably need to be on the back burner.
Yes, and I am trying to find that balance between the local residential, lowly traveled streets and the larger thoroughfares that are going to have more bang for a buck as far as the number of users affected.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I've found that balance with these proposed streets.
Yeah.
But the ones that I'm seeing are so far gone that they have to be addressed, like
Exactly, and
Pickwick
that's really my
some of
point.
these
Yes,
others,
the
yeah.
Bird Streets, absolutely, even if they aren't as well-traveled. But I imagine they are fairly well-traveled because they're sort of a thorough between Sherry Whitlock and Sager Creek. But just as I said, those other two areas of concrete streets, they're in pretty bad shape too.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Hey, Kevin, before we leave 25, and I know we're not going to make the rest of the years, I can already feel it, but I'm going to go back to Lake Francis Drive with an I, not an E. You'll catch up with me on that one.
Yeah.
So to finish that street, it's really not finished, even though we're going to finish it. The thing that's lacking is the railroad crossing.
Right.
Has to be improved.
That's correct.
We've done 2 streets and that doesn't work. And then as you go towards Mount Olive, how difficult it is to us off Washington, just to curb, make that street look like we finished it. It just looked like we piecemealed it. And we've gotten I didn't get any flack off it until recently, but I'll take full responsibility. You're on the board, that's what we do. So we need to make it look like it's a finished street. Because down by the park, it just looks like, and before we go into all these others, it's our standard now. That's what a finished street looks like in the city of Siloam Springs. And I would just encourage us, that would be a good thing this year as you also address drainage. And I know you're putting up fencing. There's some stuff to finish, but that's just that, that extra step, customer service to finish that thing out. And do we have to work with R&R on that, with the railroad?
Yes.
And that's going to be,
We've
That's
had really good
that's a
dialogue with them. We're actually in the process of getting the documentation that we need to do it. I think Kevin gave me an update last week that we're really close, so that's next. We got a punch list right now, and they may have to heat up some things and re-roll it. There's some areas that it is not a completed job. We want to make sure it's done right and people are happy with it. So we're getting closer.
Yeah, and particularly around the railroad. So I've reached out, and since Canadian Pacific bought Kansas City Southern, they've been much more responsive. And so I have the permit, and Jay has reviewed that and had some questions and concerns for me to get back to CPKC with. But we're looking at a permit for just that little bit of work that we need to do, and they'll have like flaggers on site for their trains and traffic control and things like that. And then we would be looking at removing where that pavement has humped up on both sides, particularly that west side is really bad. And then where that utility crossing has settled right before the start of the Lake Francis project. And then in the future, I'd like to come through with a large number of railroad crossing improvements, because they can typically move those panels from one crossing to another if we're working on multiple crossings at the same time. And then we'd really be talking about just the number of panels missing from the area that they'd have to bring in, and then the upgrades to the gates, which are substantial as well.
When we do that, they will be able to have a sidewalk go over the railroad tracks as well, right? Or something at least.
That is my hope, and
Yeah.
I've not confirmed with anybody what Canadian Pacific's stance is on that, because Kansas City Southern was pretty adamant that you do not get a pedestrian crossing. And so my hope is that Canadian Pacific is more open to that, and I don't know what that would look like, if it would be a
KCS.
separate gate or a continuation or a more expensive main gate. And then also the possibility of quiet zones through the city, which is, if we're bearing the cost for the widening, we might as well also do the quiet zones at the same time, since they're already bringing new gates in.
KCS was so difficult, we tried to do that under the railroad track trail.
Kevin, first of all, if you say we get quiet zones, I brought that up when you were in college. So I'm gonna fall apart, but that's a whole nother topic. Get with these Canadians while they're under the threat of tariffs, and let's negotiate and get her done before anything else gets settled out. Words of encouragement.
And I agree on the quiet zones. I've had citizens come to me about it in meetings a couple of years ago over it, so that would be awesome.
That's the cost has been the deterrent, especially since, at least at the time when we were looking at and having some of those conversations, we weren't planning to widen as well. So we'd be bringing in the crossing for, close to $500,000 for the quiet zone, and then sometime in the future needing to widen it and having that to bear that cost again. So we definitely need to plan it properly. So real quickly, just kind of gloss over 2026 and 2027. Obviously, we'll dive more into this as we get into budget season for next year, and then as we work through our 2025 list. Some of these may move up into 2025, particularly Carl Street in front of the post office.
Hey, Kevin, I'm sorry. On the Dawn Hill, I know Director Allen had asked
Yes.
earlier, on your quote of the 1475, how wide is that?
The 1475 is 37 feet, but only to Meadowbrook. So
Where is Meadowbrook? I'm lost.
Meadowbrook is south of Lawless. It's got that loop
Okay.
street and then comes back out. That's where city limits stops on both sides of the street, and then city limits follows center line to Oak Crest. So if we partnered with the county, we'd look to go all the way to Oak Crest. And then during the break, I worked up a quick contractor number for that. For a 28-foot bid out would be about 4.2 million. That's kind of what we
What would you
Versus
be,
what you have on the,
versus it was like 5.6, I think.
I'm
for
putting you
that.
on the spot. What would you think the time estimate would be on that? I'm just thinking, you know, the board said poof, and here's the money that we could get started. But I think that would process 3-4 months, but then the widening, I just believe
Yeah.
this project would take close to a year.
It'd be, you're probably looking at 7 or 8 months in design, probably 7 months in design. The bridge is kind of the wild card. Call it 7 months in design, and then right-of-way acquisition, depending on the width of the street that we want to build, if that's 37 or 28. And then the actual construction project itself, it's about 4,000 feet, so, I mean, you're looking at probably 45 weeks.
when you say bridge, what are you talking about bridge?
There's a, north of Meadowbrook, there's a floodplain through that area. There's a pretty major, I think it's box culverts. I don't think it's actually a bridge. But that drainage crossing, that the bottom of the hill, and then it comes back up as you travel to Oak Crest.
Okay.
Right, and being able to acquire these easements, but if we go 28 or 37 feet, that's gonna be a little bit of work.
Cost, yeah.
Well, the fact it's only 18 now, yeah, that'll take some work the wider you go.
So I just wanted just to kind of an estimate how long it's gonna take, so that's why it's in 26, because it's gonna take that long to design and get ready. All right, go ahead, Kevin, I'm sorry.
In 2027, I do have Airport Road in here. Quite an upcharge on that because I'm not as familiar with the drainage in that area. And I know, since we know that there are structural issues, we can assume it's going to be on the high side of that $35 a square foot. And then Country Club, that's another one that's kind of 18 or 19 feet wide, where a lot of traffic has been added. Looking at close to $4 million for that project.
Kevin, let's go back up to Airport Road just a little bit. I don't know if they're thinking this, but when we're looking at $15 million for rebuild, how much do you think we would incur with a partnership? I mean, because most of that road's gonna be city limits.
That is, I think about a fifth of it is in city limits on both sides, and then the whole stretch of the airport is city limits down center line. So we'd probably be looking at not quite half that number, if I had to just guesstimate.
Good luck getting even half that from the county.
And that's another conversation we would have to have, because since it is a county partnership, are we having them or asking them to construct to our full 37-foot width? Are we constructing to their 22-foot standard? We would need to figure those things out. I believe the cost I have here is that 37-foot width, but they may not be interested in partnering with that, so we may have to absorb the cost from 22 to 37 in that case.
We've been hearing about Airport Road for 10 to 15 years, but as Brad was pointing out, the pothole replacement on that street does not ever last, and it may just be a situation until we can get to it. We've got to do a better job of pothole filling on that street, because that's been a big part of the residents' problem, is just how the potholes will sit there open forever.
Okay. And then the other thing I'd like to mention, this 2027 list, I'll be asking for a new road condition analysis in 2026. So that would be adjusting the list that you see here today.
How much does something like that cost?
On their website, they had it at $95 a mile along the road, so about 12,000 plus whatever add-ons they might have now. And then a couple things before we wrap up that I want to keep on the back of everybody's mind. The intersection of Highway 412 and 16, the estimate from RDOT is about a $3.6 million improvement there to add turning lanes on the south side of that intersection on the Highway 16 side to get to 4 lanes like what we have on the Progress side. Right-of-way, new signals, drainage improvements, that estimate is from RDOT. And then Highway 59 and Kenwood Street, they are separately proposing to replace that bridge over Highway 412 and have asked if we would like to partner for the intersection at Kenwood Street. And so that $6.5 million, that's their estimate there for pedestrian improvements, right-of-way, the intersection itself. And I don't recall, I think it did have a signal at that intersection in their estimate.
Sorry, I know we're trying to finish up, but that's been a big intersection for accidents, and even though they've done some of the requests that I made, sooner than later would be better. It concerns me that it's just, future need, because it's dangerous.
We've had a couple meetings with them, and they're looking at, I think, a 3-year design build for the bridge. And so probably sometime this year, we'll need to make the call on whether or not we would partner with them for this intersection.
Thank you.
The Kenwood Street widening from Highway 16 to Bruce Rutherford, that $9.4 million is an estimate from Garver. They're at 60% design right now, working their way towards 90%. And then a couple others. So Winding Springs, which is a PD that you'll see, I think the annexation is actually tonight and the rezone will be in the future. But that PD would construct the extension from Highway 59 to Kenwood Street for all but about 630 feet to the north end, south of that signal, because it's a separate owner, there's existing development there. And so the city's completion of that gap, we'd be looking at about $500,000 plus the right-of-way, since no right-of-way is currently in that location. And then similarly, to the west, the Spring Hills subdivision, if you'll recall, Simon Sager Avenue extends south by Jiffy Lube and dead ends, and there's about not quite 1,000 feet between that dead end and the Spring Hills subdivision that the city could possibly make that connection in the future if development doesn't take off in that area to do that. And then the Quarter Road extension to Highway 16, which we discussed earlier in talking about realigning Waukesha Road, that would be about a $1.2 million project, $1.25 million, but Siloam Community Gardens is currently proposing that with their development. So, and then just wanted to end with, this is the map that you have in front of you showing the street projects over these next 3 years, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
That last page you have with all those $1 million, you're nearly $22.25 million. And I know we want to do Airport Road, but in my opinion, you've got to look at that new school being built as such a priority.
Yes,
Do we know the date of when they plan to break ground on that?
I actually had a talk with the superintendent today. We have a meeting on Thursday at 1 o'clock. They're going to tell us about their future plans, because with the annexation you'll see tonight, in the way that's set up, we just want to make sure what we're doing meets what they're doing. So we're going to have a meeting on Thursday.
But we've got to be prepared once that's finished for the amount of traffic from parents.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Madam Mayor.
So, yeah,
Quick question on the Kenwood, Highway 16 to Bruce Rutherford. What is the proposed width of that street?
I know at the intersection, it was wider. I don't think it's I don't recall if it's the full 37. I'd have to go back and look, but they're proposing the street width with a 10-foot side path on that north side.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Kevin, let's just make sure we get these printed for the planning commission members.
They've already got them, Director.
so good discussion, good presentation, Kevin. Thank you very much. We will have our next workshop at our next regularly scheduled meeting, which is February the 4th at 4:30, same place here in the boardroom. The library is booked during those times. So, Alan, unless you have a last comment, we are going to adjourn and come back at 6:30 for our regular meeting. Thank you, everyone.